we talked about this young man arriving in the cottage emporium where you were working.
So it was the beginning of a passionate love affair with this country. He actually really loved it. He came for on a 2-year contract and he never went back. So I mean, there was something that drew him here. Something there'd been some connection with India when his father came in 1942. But something had intrigued him about India, and he traveled throughout India. As I said, he spoke no Hindi and learned to navigate with different kinds of people from mostly in rural India where he was interacting with weavers and dyers and printers and stuff like that. He hired a Hindi teacher to teach him. The Hindi teacher learned how to make shirts for Fabindia. John never learned Hindi to speak to his
That's right. And that Hindi teacher's size of shirt was one of the shirt sizes which was available for a long time. And the other size was John's size.
I know.
According to the letters that I've read. So John had these long arms.
Yes.
And so the particular size of shirt that was selling at Fabindia in the beginning had extra long arms.
Yes.
Which would not be good for the Indian male.
That's true.
And the other size was the teacher, who was a smaller size.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, it's pointing to two things, I think, which is what is so special about this. One is that, John Bissell was quite obsessed and passionate about the fabric, about the handmade fabric, colors, textures. And this goes back to one very interesting story, which about when he was working at Macy's, and there was an order for the costumes of the King of Siam.
That's right.
Of a film, which is actually was remade as The King and I. And these textiles, these fabrics came from Thailand and I think from India. And the interesting thing was that, even if they were all the same colors for all the stranded children.
The fabrics came from India because Jim Thompson hadn't hit Thailand then. And all those Thai silks that became so famous later on had not developed. Right. So John went to Banaras to get it. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so the thing is that all of these similar colors had different shades of the same color.
That's right. There were no... They said that Mr. Gupta, who was in charge of Banaras Art House, said that, each weaver weaves 3 saris on his looms. And those 3 saris will be the same color. But the other 70 or 90, whatever they were, will be slightly different, if you know what I mean. John said, we want them all to be standard. And then he started dreaming and saying, if we can standardize in India, and we can get big orders, then there'll be big business between India and the US. That was his kind of philosophy of how the exports.
That was his philosophy, and that brought him here to be able to help to do that. But on the other hand, there was this other side of him, which felt deeply about the fact that it was an individual product. Each product was an individual product.
That's right.
No, because it was separate from the next one that would have been made by the same person or another loom by another person, but it could never be the same because the hand was different.
So one of his biggest buyers was Terence Conrad and the Habitat shops in London. So he had to explain to Terence in very simple words. He said, this is, you have to realize that all of it is going to look different. It's not going to look the same. So if you're looking for the same look, go to some factory, some country which is churning them out. This is how going to look like handmade. And then he also said that, I've forgotten what it was. Anyway, let's talk about something else.
No, I'm trying to make a point. You see, in today's world, which is consumer-driven completely, suddenly there is this interest in bespoke products. They call them bespoke. Now, in our time, everything was bespoke because the tailor made one particular outfit for us and the weaver was making a particular sari and this print and that. all of those differences in hand and in texture, and in even if the pattern was the same, what was then by some people called defects was actually the individualization and the so-called bespokeness of that item, which today people are dying for, in a manner of speaking, because everything becomes the same in this assembly line production. And John was already in love with this idea, even though he knew that the West and people would prefer to have, if they were buying upholstery for, let's say, 8-10 meters of upholstery for their drawing room, they didn't want too many other things. But the whole thing was, it's not a defect. This is not a defect. This is a speciality.
Yeah.
This is what you are getting. I mean, that's why you are here. So let's go forward a little bit. Let's try and recap quickly before, because everybody knows the last 10 years of the story, because all of the young people who are buying, they know the stores, how they've opened and how they've rushed. But, look at the beginning. So let's talk about where it started. Where, not the first store, but where John Bissell really started, got his first order on a first floor of a house he lived in Delhi, in golf links.
And the fabric came in rolls and rolls and rolls, and they were put in his drawing room, in his living room. And if the guests came in the evening, they sat on rolls of what was called
on the fabric.
Delhi homespun cotton, and everybody had dinner sitting on those rolls of cotton.
Yeah.
And then one day the landlord told him, Mr. Bissell, I think my roof is cracking. So he had to move quickly out of the golf links into a shopping.
I think that it moved to Mathura Road. I think the Fabindia moved to Mathura Road.
Yes, it went to
Fabindia Inc. That's where the big growth of the export company of Fabindia happened, in Mathura Road.
So I'll tell you something else about him that he said to me early on in the thing. He said, I only want women to run my shops and my company, because he said they are so good at multitasking. They manage so many things at their homes so well. I only want, and he did. All the women in responsible positions, all the roles of responsible workers in Fabindia were filled by women. And
Absolutely.
he was very proud of that fact. Very proud of that fact.
And like the products that went on and on, the same people continued. Nobody in any position in Fabindia grew from one.
The best people that he employed in Fabindia in the early years all came from being teachers at my nursery school. He took them one by one. Meena Chowdhury went, Rajni went. Every one of them, started at my school and then moved on to Fabindia.
So, my dear Bim, could we mention briefly the synergy between MS Bim and Mr. John Bissell? I mean, where is the connection? When did the connection happen?
Well, I think part of his whole thing about falling in love with India was also falling in love with me. I mean, we worked together, but not like into each other's territories. And we had a very good life, I must say. So he married not only me, he married Fabindia for life, for better, for worse. He was just, and not only Fabindia, but India. He married India for life. That was him. He was really quite a rare human being. So true to his ethos, and so brought such a sense of waspy ethics to this country. In his office, if an export order, could not catch the boat that it was supposed to go on because the chap who came to clear the papers demanded a drive, he said, we'll wait. Yeah. And so he was known as that crazy American wo deta hi nahi kuch. I
heard that he sat outside a government office from one day to the next day. I mean, he would go home in the evening, come back in the morning.
Yeah.
He said one day it's going to happen. they will sign it one day, because
And it did happen. He
and they,
eventually, they said he will never pay anything, so they eventually just took his stuff and let it go. So, anyway.
there is a commitment, to these things. There's a commitment, and that, I think, commitment is really important. And I think it's good for your customers today to know that in the beginning it was an export company. In Mathura Road, things were being exported, but there was always leftover fabric sitting in the Mathura Road warehouse. And then, of course, he would say, those who are interested, please come and you can take it, buy it for as good as it is.
But the whole thing was kind of organic. John's whole life here was organic. What he did in Fabindia was sort of organic. I mean, take the question you're saying, these loose fabrics that were left, samples that were cut. He brought all this bag full of tatters home one day. Told my mother, he said, let's do a children's line using these things. So she designed something for him, which was using all these square pieces of different fabrics that were left over from this thing. And that became the children's line in the beginning.
Amazing.
But anyway, Radhika, you know the story as well, because what you wrote in The Fabric of Our Lives is really not the story of Fabindia, but of a connection that a person and a country can have that was so genuine, so of the heart. You should talk a little bit about that, because that, I think, is what was interesting in.
See, what he felt, I think, from all the data that I got from the letters, is that first he felt for that craft. He felt for the craft. He really believed that craft was a very integral part of this country. Integral. And he was in love with that fabric. The texture of the fabric moved him. It was like, Absolutely. It was something that was close to him. And that was made by somebody, by a pair of hands. And so those hands he wanted to nourish. He wanted to cherish those hands so that they would not stop making that craft. For him, it was, art and craft was interwoven, because for him it was a thing of beauty. Yeah. Every piece, Absolutely. Whether, he started with what traditionally the weavers were making, but then he would quickly see the differences in design and say, oh, should we change this pattern? Should we change this color? I mean, there is a story of Terence Conran sitting on the floor of a weaver's hut, very excited with what was happening and saying, just if they can make this sample, okay, here's another color. Let's try this with rust. Let's try it with green. And that, what you're talking about, the organic, it was happening in front of their eyes. It's like an artist, This is like art. So to be able to get that product out, he had to look after the weaver. To look after the weaver, he had to make sure the weaver had enough work. To have enough work, John Bissell had to get the orders. But to get the orders is very difficult, because it wasn't existing in that bulk that you could show it anywhere. And we are talking about get mobile phones and internet. We didn't even have proper phone connections. You had to physically go, and this going also, how do you connect little villages? You have to go by bus, you have to go by car, you have to go by train. John's stories are full of his train journeys. He loved his train journeys. He got really involved with them. And there's a story of him driving into Rajasthan, because so much of all the fabric came from there, the prints, the block prints, the ajrak, so many things, so exciting. And he went with his friend, I think, I forgot his, Mr. Townsend? Swayze. And he says, they were driving along the dunes beyond Jaisalmer, and there over the dunes there's a camel, and on the camel is a man. And so they stopped the car and they waved to him. And then there's the driver has to talk, because both of them only speak English. And so they're asking the farmer, this man on the camel, what are you doing? He said, I have to go from this village to that village. And this is the way you travel. You don't find it difficult that you don't have a car to travel. And he said, I don't understand your question. In this place, we use camels. That's how we go. I don't miss anything. I'm complete in what I do. And John wanted to preserve this completeness. He wanted to preserve it because he thought it was special. It was different from other things in other countries and everything that was happening. And to do that, he knew that he could not over order, because if a man has 25 looms, he can only make 25 things at the same time. There's no point giving him a larger order. You can give it, but then you have to wait for 6-8 months for it to come, And so there's actually a statement he's made about that I cannot grow this business because I want those people who are making this fabric to continue making it with their hands. And there's only that much. So, if you can only order 8, you order 8. If you order 200, fine. Then you wait for 8 months to get it. And he never moved from that position.
Another thing he did as principal, he never cancelled an order, never. Because he said that they do it on trust for me. And if the business, my client refuses to take the order, we will absorb it somehow, but we will not. That's how the home market sort of made a beginning, that they never never wanted to have any order cancelled and the stuff given back to the weaver. So
because there was no buffer, you see, the buffer of the weaver was John Bissell and Fabindia. So Fabindia kept buying stuff for picking up orders which weren't going anywhere also, because he said, well, this time he'll get it, So they opened up into the market, and that market included young girls like me who went rushing into the stores, because there was all this beautiful khadi. What he did with khadi, khadi was only a political garment till then, fabric. He popularized it. It became the thing. The intellectuals, the chic, boutique people wore khadi. And now it's become a fashion statement. It was already a fashion statement, as far as we were concerned. Because it shared our care for the fabric and for the country. It became a thing. And I mean, I know because I was part of it. I'm not talking from anybody else's point of view. And so, the other thing about him I wanted to just share is that he went to so many different corners of India to find the different kinds of weaves and crafts and products that were available there, and to see how best to work at them so that they could get to a market which was a little more sophisticated than the village market, so that he could get a better price
without losing its authenticity.
Without losing it. So, it's a very thin line, but he never thought that it was a very, he would take it and he would say, yes, okay, let's improve this, let's make it maybe a little, looms were a certain width. You couldn't do very much about that. So within that, how can we fashion something which can work in a way that it can work and it can work for the other market?
Yes, he got some remarkable designers to help him. Ritin Mozumdar was part of the growing years of fashion. Yes. And a whole lot of other people that he also...
Shona Ray, Laila has done some work. The thing is that this between the designer and the production, which is again come back, as you know, in a big way now. We have designers and production and a big thing. In those days, for some reason, the fabric got the importance in the world rather than the name of the people who produced it or the designers. Ritin Mozumdar was a big name.
Yeah, till Mozumdar came and he revolutionized the whole home market look totally.
Yeah, there was a target, that round circle of Ritin Mozumdar, which if you ask anybody my age, they will immediately tell you, oh yes, we had a tablecloth. Oh yes, we had this. We have a shared history through the work that John Bissell did in Fabindia, because that history is an Indian history and we share it. And now, even now, there's a market has grown and of course they're sharing it, but it's such a widespread market, At that time, because it was a little smaller, we all felt like we belonged to this very special club, which is good for India, which we are doing good stuff. We're going to cottage industries. We are buying things that are hand woven and handcrafted. And it was so important to us. It was an ideology. We were proud of it, So I would thank John for this, that he did this. He made it happen. He fashioned it in such a way that it became an ideology for young people, and India was growing and developing, and it was looking at a better world, and all this was part of that better world, and we were going to carry the rural communities with us, the craftspeople, you know. So I think that exchange between the weaver, the marketplace, and the company that managed to make it is a very important touch point, you know. We cared that we walked into that store. We cared. It was not just any store, you know. That's the personalization of this thing, which is why this name creates all this nostalgia. I think it's a very important part of the brand. So would you like to give any more stories of it, or? And also, you know, so many people talk about art.
Okay, I have a personal story actually, in the way that I was constantly amazed at someone who grew up in a culture in which privacy was the most important thing that you had. You owned it, you possessed it, you practiced it. You wanted to keep your life, parts of your life, private. John entered my family, a Punjabi family, almost joint, living in New Delhi. No privacy. I mean, anybody could walk into his bedroom, our bedroom, anytime. It was the first room in the house. If people came from outside, they knocked on it. So how he got adjusted and navigated through all these things that must have been so alien for him. He was a remarkable man in that way.
It is true. I believe he had only half a cupboard with his things. That he had, his clothes were like he wasn't a big buyer himself. I mean, I still remember this. Is that true?
You know, when his family came to visit once, my mother said to me in all innocence, she said, you know, John's family seems to be okay. They're well dressed and everything, and they seem to be quite well off. But John, you know, his shirts are always torn, and he's not very, you know, I think he's comes from a very poor part of the family. It was not.
He was so unself-conscious, you know.
He was so,
in some ways about himself. But I mean, the touching stories that I've heard from the people I interviewed who have been working there was, you know, when John was in his office upstairs in a store or in an office or in part of Fabindia, when he would come down from his office to see what was happening in the store or what somebody was doing, he made sure that everybody heard him come down the steps, making a noise so that in case they were doing something that they didn't want to see, that they would quickly go back to their places. I mean, how truly sensitive is that? You know, you need to have a huge sense of self-esteem to be able to be that kind of a human being, you know. And obviously that's come from from his background, I would say. But, you know, unbroken. This is an unbroken thread. And you must be so proud to be here today.
And I must say, my children have done a great job in carrying forward that legacy.
Absolutely. William carried it forward. He brandished it in the world. I mean, you know, India was known to a fewer people. Now it's everybody. You know, it's like, I mean, one of the interviews I had in a little town. Sorry, go ahead.
When John died, we had 4 stores. And now we have, before Corona, we had 320 in India and about 9 abroad, I think. So, I mean, William did a great job in taking the company forward, and so it was all over the place. Impressive.
William has made it a company totally adapted to today's world over the last 20-30 years, because that kind of company couldn't exist today.
Yeah, and not lost its brand value, actually.
No. In fact, one of the young girls who was working in a store, I think somewhere in Kerala, I'm not remembering, Kochi or something, when I interviewed her saying, you're new, and so where have you come from? And she named a very remote village. And she said that, you know, I used to tell my father that I am going to learn to speak English because I want to work in a Fabindia store. And he said, what is that? And she said, you don't know Fabindia? In this, obviously she had been with her friends into the closest town or city or to Kochi, and she'd seen it. And she said, I am so proud that I have a job here. Now, that is a brand equity that has gone into a village as an aspiration. It means something, It's not a small thing. And I was very touched. I mean, this coming from, somebody who's been there for 50 years, 40 years is one thing. But a young thing who's joined 2 years, 3 years earlier, who's actually, to join, to be associated with this is such a big thing. I think that's William's doing. There's no question about that. Of course. Yeah.
So shall we call it today?
I think so. We can keep talking like this, otherwise there'll be no end to it. But I think we should, because I have my book here. So, what I started doing is I started reading it again.
I wrote it also. You should read
something.
You
also wrote?
Read
read
something from the book, yeah?
Okay, but I hadn't really identified something. Okay, I will. It's just open out to... it's 2007, so I'm going to read from the second last page, and this is a study that was done on the company, on Fabindia, for the Harvard Business School, and it's William Bissell who has spoken these words in 2007. Okay, so before that, I'm just going one para up to quote John. And then I will continue with and end with William's quotation. Many years ago, John Bissell had said, in addition to making profits, our aims are constant development of new hand-woven products, a fair, equitable, and helpful relationship with our producers, and the maintenance of quality upon which our reputation rests. In 2007, when Fabindia was featured as a case study at the Harvard Business School, William Bissell stated, we are promoting an alternative vision for the future. It is collaborative with our suppliers in the true sense of the word. It is participatory with the customers that share our views, and the products have an intrinsic value proposition as opposed to imposed value. I believe that the only way to alleviate rural poverty is to generate sustainable employment, and the only way to do that is if we run our business in a profitable manner. It seems contradictory that we pursue both a social goal and profit, but I believe that is the only way to do it. This commitment is the Fabindia phenomenon.
Good
so from father to son.
Thank you.